the reality of the situation was I was caught stealing gay porn.
I heard you tell the story of how your sexual identity manifested itself with your parents on
Mhm.
another podcast. And in fact, it was Judy Bowen's podcast,
Yeah.
Quitters, which is such a great theme for a podcast. So I was like, damn
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
someone else took
Yeah.
that idea.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
um, and you told this story in a way that was very compassionate and funny in parts, but also very painful. And I'm also aware, talking about this as a straight woman myself, there's a whole language around quote unquote coming out that is not applied to straight people. A straight person never is expected to come out as straight. And so
Mhm.
I want to preface this discussion by saying the language is inelegant. But
Yeah.
would you mind exploring that with me and what happened with you telling your parents, or rather them being told on your behalf, that you
Yeah.
were gay?
Well, I mean, the I don't remember how I told it on Julie's podcast, but I mean, the reality of the situation was I was caught stealing gay porn when I was very young, and I had stole it, a few magazines before in the past, and so I had a stash of this material at home, um, and I finally got caught stealing it. And I was brought into the back room of the store, and they called the cops, and they called my parents, and they showed my parents the nature of the material. I remember that so specifically, that phrase, the nature of the material I was stealing. And there was, from there was a lot of just like awkward silence. Like we didn't talk about it, even though it was like this thing that was just lying out there that we was front and center. It was in the open, and yet like no one knew how to talk about it. I certainly didn't have the tools to talk about it. I was just, a kid. My parents really didn't have the tools to talk about it. And so I remember going to a therapist, and I think my parents were like, well, we'll have a therapist deal with this. And I just remembered sort of being a bit futile. Like it's sort of like, I think they were looking for someone to sort of give them some answers on how to deal with this, or say, okay, we fixed it. There wasn't like, I don't think there was ever, I don't think there was an open heart for them to like at that moment say, okay, we'll just learn how to love this new version of our son. That I think was always a suspicion of theirs, but never confirmed. Um, and so that was like kind of the first coming out for me, I feel.
And how old were you then?
Probably I was like a freshman or sophomore in high school. So 14, 15, young. I was very young.
Yeah. And you ended up in front of a judge for stealing those magazines.
Yes. I had to go to court. I remember my mom with me at the courthouse, and, the crime was committed on like, months before. And then like later they had to, I was put in the system, and I had to like wait for my hearing date. And so I think in that time there was a bit of healing that happened. My mom sort of just forgot about it, or was less angry about it, probably came to grips with it a bit, and just, obviously meditated on it herself. And she was easier on me. I felt like there was a little bit of understanding and compassion that she was giving to me. And then when we were at the courthouse that day, months later, she ran into one of her patients at the courthouse, and it was like all that day one trauma was right back on the surface. And she was just really upset again, and how embarrassing it was for the family, and how embarrassed that she was that she had to see someone that she knew with her son at the courthouse. And anyway, I was sentenced. I was given community service for probably like 3 to 6 months or something. I chose to be a teacher's aide at a preschool, which was so much fun. I love kids, and I ended up, being a nanny later in my life. So I think it was the first time I sort of realized that I was actually really great with kids, and kids loved me. And it was actually a really wonderful time, but it was community service. I wasn't getting paid anything. And there was a piece of me that sort of feels like an example was made of me in a way. And I think if that happened now, I think it would have been handled differently.
Yeah, I mean, I just feel so sad for you, even though you ended up discovering that you were so great with kids, which I can completely imagine. But the amount of misplaced shame
Yeah.
that must have been heaped upon you,
Yeah.
that was not yours to own, must have been so difficult for you to unpack. at 14?
It was a very painful time for me. I felt very alone. I was never suicidal or anything, but I was definitely depressed. And it also reconfirmed my desire to get out of Albuquerque. I was like, this place is not for me. They do not understand me in this part of the United States. I need to get out. I need to go to New York. I need to take this passion that I know I have and go to the place where that passion's created, and that's New York City. I want to be on stage. I want a life in theater. And so it did confirm that for me, which I'm really happy about. And it also motivated me to make that happen. Like there was nothing that was going to keep me from making a life for myself in New York City. And, when I left home to go to school in New York, my parents and I hadn't ever had a conversation about my sexuality. And, it was when there was space between us that those conversations started happening through letters and in safer ways that felt safer for me at least. And, it was slow, but I think we got to a point where it was out there on the table. And even though I feel like my dad had to be reminded a few times, he would ask me about girlfriends, and I was like, Dad, we've done this before. And he'd be like, oh yeah, no, I know, I remember. Which is just the way my dad is. But, fast forward 2 years later, they're both dancing at my wedding to Justin. So they have come a long way, and I'm really proud of them. And I feel like the process has to be part of it. You can't expect people to change overnight. But you also can't always accept that people are set in their ways, and that they're like the excuse that, oh, well, I was raised a different way. I just don't think it's acceptable. I think that we all have the ability to change, even if, you're over 50 or over 60, over 70, like you can always become a better version of yourself.
I hope you enjoyed that video. Be sure to check out the full episode of How to Fail wherever you get your podcasts. And also make sure you're following us on social media for all the latest updates.